This is Paul Nobles from Eat to Perform. I am here with April Blackford. April, if you want to say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
I'm going to take a sip of my kombucha, the same kombucha that I've been drinking for 2 years that apparently April's introduced to everyone now. And so they're like, oh, God, April, you're so amazing, this whole kombucha thing. I mean, we got addicted to people. It's so funny, like the how negative people are about kombucha. It's like filling, you know?
No, I actually like it because it's rejuvenating. It really makes you do what?
It's also filling. I mean, it's like beer. It's sort of like drinking a beer without the alcohol in it. Kind of has that.
It actually helps. It helps my digestion very well.
Yeah, I mean that's what most people. Nikki's saying that she likes the multi-green and lavender. We have the multi-green and lavender. My wife asked me to buy that. She thought that my girls would like the lavender. They did not. It is an acquired taste, though, right? I mean, it is sort of like beer in that way. You know, you either in the beginning you might not completely like it, but eventually it kind of. I don't know. It's just one of the. It's kind of a routine for me. Kaylee's asking, what kind of drink is it? It's basically a tea, and it has probiotics. So you'll see, like at the bottom, there's like the probiotic type stuff. I mean, I could read you what it is, but I mean, do you know the general idea with kombucha?
I think it has like active cultures in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been drinking it forever. I just like it, you know.
I tried to flavor over the weekend. Have you ever tried the High Country kombucha?
Mm-mm.
I had to get it just because of the name, but it was okay. It was the goji berry flavor, but it wasn't as good as the Synergy.
You know they have this with alcohol in it, right?
Yes. Well, all of it actually has a small trace of alcohol in it.
Yeah, but they have specific ones that you can only buy if you're over 21.
Wow, where do you get that from?
Whole Foods. I don't know what the advantage of it would be, but
maybe you wouldn't have the upset stomach the next day like you do from drinking regular alcohol.
I don't know. I haven't drank regular alcohol in 28 years, so I have no idea. Let's see. Nikki's saying kind of like coconut water. Yeah, it's a little bit like coconut water. Yep, active cultures. It's fermented. So, okay, so we were talking, and I'm going to try and not be, let's see, Nancy. We talked about fasting. Okay, so Ben, what we're going to do is we're going to, we had a little bit of a discussion related to Fitbit and sex, and that kind of evolved into a couple things, and I started talking about the book, the 4-Hour Body, which I'm not a huge fan of from a dieting standpoint. I can talk a little bit about that, but and my experiences with that and why I don't think it's the answer for a lot of people. But then the real value of the book is the chapter on orgasm. And so that was part of the discussion that we had. So any thoughts, April, before we jump into?
No, why don't you just sum it up for us?
Well, it's really, I mean, I have to say, like, first of all, it was interesting, like, having people talk about it, because it's clearly something that doesn't make people comfortable. And, I'm going to have to sit here and try and explain what is going on in the book and then try and be an adult about it. I am a 46-year-old man. I've been with my wife since I was 19 years old. And so, I think the whole being embarrassed about sex talk is sort of something that really doesn't faze me very much. I do, one of the things that people don't consider with a lot of this stuff is that our kids see this, or they could potentially see this, or their friends see this. And so, so keep that in mind as we're having this discussion, that I'm going to try and be somewhat discreet because, I have a 14 and 15-year-old daughter. But once again, I would want my 14 and 15-year-old daughters to know this information. I think it's empowering. So basically, the 4-hour diet is kind of a low carb diet. He calls it the slow carb diet, and I remember there was a few things. Uh-oh, I'm not sure what happened there. Are you there, April?
I am.
Yeah, the internet does not want us talking about this.
It's a sign.
Yeah, it's a sign. So basically, the slow carb diet, Tim Ferriss sort of makes some great claims. I'm actually a huge Tim Ferriss fan. I just did not like the way he marketed this book. I was doing his slow carb diet back in 2007. Did lose a lot of weight, was miserable, did not feel like doing anything for a long period of time. Ate a lot of beans. I remember that. And digestively, that wasn't a blast. But basically, he didn't really talk a lot about the mechanism of why it worked, at least in 2007. Maybe covered it a little bit more in the book. I don't remember him covering it in the book. I just remember, that you pretty much kept carbs low throughout the week, and you had like this gigantic cheat day once a week. And then sometimes, one of the things that I found to be an advantage was to shorten the cheat weeks. So I went from 7 days to 5 days to 4 days. And then it was like, well, why wouldn't I just like keep carbs in if the carbs is really sort of helping? And I think it's sort of interesting about the whole concept of that book, because a lot of the times people will abandon what they previously believed as it relates to food. And that book, in a lot of ways, taught me what I didn't need to do, right? And it really did sort of set me up with a bad relationship with food. And luckily, I abandoned that and, did end up gaining weight. Went up to 225 from 175. And, I remember specifically going on vacation, had planned to go on vacation, was 175, ended up 190, was not like excessively eating foods or anything of that nature. It just, low carbing sort of makes you sort of insensitive to having carbohydrates. And I'd say, quickly after that, I'm just trying to do the math in my head, but it might have been right around 2009, maybe 2008, was when I realized that activity needed to be a big part of the deal for me. And I tried to keep more foods in, and then that process sort of led me down the road of hiring doctors and trainers and a lot of people with really bad approaches, but it was a more informed approach this time. A lot of the things that I did early on, I think it's sort of interesting. That's about the same time that I met April and James, and we started talking and talking about our journeys and kind of experimenting, because April had kind of come from a little bit of a vegetarian background. I think we were all exploring a little bit of what paleo and whole foods looked like, and then what we really found is that between April James and myself, we took a more flexible approach, and we tended to have better results than a lot of the people that took an inflexible approach. And so when I started blogging about that, I was actually working with clients. I started taking on CrossFit Games athletes because I was eating a lot of food and, getting better at exercise as a result. But that's not the real point here. So the real point is that the book does have extreme value. And the big chapter in the book was on female orgasm. And the idea was, he referred to it, the chapter, as the 15-minute female orgasm. Now, he didn't write that chapter, actually. He had a woman write it who was like a researcher of female orgasm. And it was really well done. And if you haven't seen it, there's references to it all over the internet. If you just Google 15-minute female orgasm, and with Tim Ferriss in it. And it was sort of groundbreaking for a lot of people, including myself. I'm into research. I'm into, exploring and experimenting with lots of different things, and certainly my relationship with my wife would be, one of those things. And so, anything to say here, April? I mean, I guess I'm all alone, but.
No, I'm just listening to you exploring.
Okay.
So tell us the sum of it, because I will say that I actually have not read it. I have not read it. I saw you link it today. I did not get a chance to read it because I was busy. But I have actually suggested that approach to a lot of the females that I coach who, are stressed out and things like that. They go on vacation. I'm like, don't stress. Go have lots of sex. Take a walk. Just enjoy yourself. You'll feel better when you come back.
Yeah. This is very specific sex. And I'm just trying to think of where we could start here. But one of the things that, and you guys can go ahead and just hit us up with questions. We're probably only going to be maybe 5 more minutes on this topic, and then we'll move on. Because there really wasn't, the thing that it was really good at is a very small piece of information. Now, one of the things that I wanted to say was related to date night and relationships when you've been in a relationship for a long time and you have kids. And so if you don't have kids, a lot of the times, you might think, well, I mean, you have all the time in the world. You could have sex whenever you want. It's different when you have children, and it's different when you have lots of distractions. And so, this idea that you would go out on date night, as an example, have a bunch of food, drink a bunch of wine, and then, want to have sex afterwards. It's not always the case, so one of the things that my wife and I try to do is we make sure that we plan for it ahead of time, meaning not after food, because you don't tend to feel particularly affectionate at that moment, even though, wine can be involved, and I'm not saying that it would never happen. The big things in the book really talked about building anticipation. I think that that's a pretty common theme in the way that women relate to men. But one of the things that it did talk about, and the woman that wrote the chapter talked a lot about, is that as you're building this anticipation, oftentimes even the woman will get anxious and you know, the magic happens kind of prematurely, right? And so, so they suggested having like this 15-minute, you know, time frame so you can actually build the anticipation. And you know, some of this is off of memory, so you know, but I'll get to the main point. So the two main takeaways were the pillow that you would use to kind of change the angle of sex, so you're kind of aiming more towards the G-spot area, and which I mentioned in the group earlier today that I found distracting, and I think most people would find it distracting, and so we ended up buying like this buckwheat husk pillow that they suggested, and I still have it, but it's really more of like a back supporter while I'm reading stuff in bed now, because it takes away from the moment a little too much, and so you can sort of get the same type of positioning as long as there's some upper body strength from the male. I don't remember. I believe that there was some positions with the female on top, and so I don't remember much about that. I didn't remember that being like particularly spectacular, but information that just stuck with me. So you might want to go back and check the chapter, or there's Google searches will find a lot of this information. So the big thing that it teaches you is that women have a lot of sensitivity in the 1 o'clock region. And so the only way to really kind of say this is to, like, you're facing a female's genitalia and you're looking at 1 o'clock, and that 1 o'clock is where a lot of the sensitivity in the organ is. And so basically what she talks about is some level of circular motion, some level of stimulation that doesn't, you wouldn't, as an example, just go to this 1 o'clock and then the magic happens. That's not how it works. That's how it works for guys. It's not exactly how it works for women. And so basically you would, really sort of work in this 15-minute time frame, not just, orally, but
so essentially you're going to start at, say, around 7 o'clock, and then you're
so at 7 o'clock. At 7 o'clock, you're kind of canoodling and just enjoying each other's company. At about 7:05, things are starting to move, and around 7:10, as an example, I guess the word would be cunnilingus that we would be talking about here, and I'm assuming I'm saying that right. And for the most part, what you're doing is trying to elicit some a good response, and then once you start to have that response, then you start honing in on that 1 o'clock area, and then once that heightened sensitivity is there, the 1 o'clock area allows that sensitivity to kind of get the desired response being orgasm for the woman. So that's as uncomfortable as I can be. I think I did as good a job as you possibly could do in this scenario, and I totally see why Tim Ferriss had a woman do it, but I don't feel uncomfortable talking about this. I think this is actually a very important topic for men to understand, because I think that it's a very important topic as it relates to your relationship. And I think the other thing too, it's one of these things that actually works. Like, it will change your relationship. I mean, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that, you know, there was nothing previous to that, but, you know, that learning that information was really super helpful. I'll just put that out there. So let's see. Let's see. Okay, what discussion did I? Someone just signed up last week. Just signed up this week. I'd love to hear about how we can get started on the program. We're going to do that in just a second. Oh, good Lord, this is something, best webinar ever. We'll be telling the boyfriend. I will tell you this, ladies. Definitely have your guys read that chapter. It's very helpful. And Teddy says, this gives new meaning to eat to perform. So I guess that's I guess I didn't really think about that before I said it. But yeah, I honestly, I think it's silly that, you know, this is something that can't be talked about. You know, I think that, you know, having pleasurable sex, you know, with your partner, you know, like I said, I've been with my wife since I was 19 years old. If you don't continuously explore your relationship, then you're sort of missing out on what the real magic is, you know. And you know, if that means that I have to be a little uncomfortable for 10 minutes during a webinar to explain it, then I'll be uncomfortable, you know. And people can be critical of me for saying this, but frankly, I think that it's an important discussion to have. And so there you go.
Well, I'll speak up and I will say that the more sex that I have, I'm happier and I'm healthier and I'm less stressed out. So I think there's many benefits. Many.
Yeah. Kaylee's saying, will you link this book somewhere, please? I will. I did link earlier to a site that kind of described it well. To be honest with you, I think the book is not very good. I can try to find the author that wrote it. She did an amazing job, much better than I'm doing here right now. I will say this though. I mean, some of, you know, that 1 o'clock thing, I mean, that's like a game changer, you know. But in terms of a lot of the other information, you know, I didn't particularly think that it was, you know, great. I mean, in terms of like the anticipation, and then just how, you know, I mean, you're a couple and you're together and you know, the moment's happening and you can kind of, you know, rush it both sides, you know, and just kind of building that level of anticipation. I mean, if you ever think about how, you know, when you go out on a date and, you know, you'll get excited about just being with that person throughout the evening, and then there's some level of affection happening, and then it sort of leads to kind of more magical. That's sort of what they're talking about, is just really working on building up that anticipation. So, so I don't know how we transition to fat loss from there, but no, I think yeah, I agree with you, April. I think that, you know, I mean, sex is certainly something that that is going to lead to stress relief. I think it's sort of interesting to talk about libido. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that's a conversation that we have a lot with people that come from an extreme dieting background.
Oh, I totally agree. I hear it all the time. I actually experience it myself. You know, when you know, increase your food, you know, you have more energy. A lot of people, when they start adding more carbohydrates in, their body temperature gets a little hotter, you know, and all of a sudden they're having sex more, basically. You know, right. and I hear it all the time, you know, that, you know, their sex life has improved, and, you know, just all the way around their life.
Well, I thought what you were going to say was that there's a direct connection between libido and testosterone, even in the case of women, and that is what's going to drive you to have that level of anticipation. And what happens when you undereat, and actually this is well known within bodybuilding, that especially for men, but definitely for women too, that their libido goes down, and it's sort of interesting. Like Ronda Rousey talks about this in MMA, fairly often, that having more sex, kind of keeps her testosterone up. But one of the things that is well known within the bodybuilding community is that as you start to get leaner and leaner and leaner, especially natural bodybuilding, where you're not using anything to kind of keep your testosterone high artificially, you will basically lose your mojo. You won't be able to get it up, And Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, who was one of the people that we use as a resource for Eat to Perform, he did a natural bodybuilding contest, and he wrote a blog about it. And the blog was something like, "Is natural bodybuilding castration?" And that's real,
Yeah.
And so when
I remember him saying towards the very end of his dieting phase, the very end when his calories dropped lower and lower, it was, bye-bye, erections, basically just testosterone just plummeted.
Yeah, I mean, even Chris Dietz was talking about, when he's cut in the past, that it's affected him negatively, and that's one of the reasons why he doesn't like cutting. And it is something that you have to consider. You have to consider, that is a byproduct. And that's why when you diet, you don't want to be dieting all the time. And you go, well, that sounds horrible for men, but what about women? Same thing for women. Testosterone is definitely going to be one of the determinants as it relates to your libido. And so, what you'll often hear, I think April hears this a lot, is when somebody's dieting, they're often cranky, and then they'll say, well, my husband is really happy with, how I'm not very cranky. I'm guessing that's not the only thing your husband is happy about, because when you start to eat more and start feeling, you have more energy, you're naturally going to have more testosterone, and then your libido is going to come back. And so all of these things end up being favorable. And I think that, there's two things that we don't get a lot of credit for, that we should get a lot of credit for, is sex and sleep. And both things are very favorable in the case of Eat to Perform. Virtually anybody talking about any deficit way of eating, those two things tend to be compromised. Sort of depends on how much fat you have to use and things of that nature, but there you go. So Ben said he just started this week. Book talked about fasting. I'm not sure when and if that is appropriate for me. I'm looking to gain muscle and have 10% body fat. Also, what is your thought on fats before bed? Well, for 10% body fat, can you do me a favor, Ben, and tell me what your how much you weigh and what's your height? Ben might have been scared away. He said, I have 10%. Sorry, I'm 225 and 6'3". Okay. So it sounds like your issue is not, a lot of times people with 10%, they'll be 155 and 5'9", as an example. And so for those people, we'll often say to them that the goal is to, maybe increase their lean muscle mass. You sound like you have a fair amount of muscle mass. Can I ask you what your goals are? Like, what are you trying to do? I know you probably want to lose fat or maybe
He said his goals were to gain muscle.
It's going to be really hard to gain muscle at 225. 225, you're pretty close to what your genetic potential is. Now that doesn't mean that you can't change what your muscle can do, but I'd be interested to know, what are your goals? Like, are you trying to get better at CrossFit? Are you trying to be a better power lifter or a triathlete, or what does that look like? Because I see a lot of people that are bin sized that want to put on muscle, and genetically it's just very difficult to do. You already have a lot of muscle. He says, I do CrossFit and compete. Okay, so that helps. I would say that, you're similar to a friend of mine that I'm actually going to go see at the East Regional, Tim Paulson. Tim has a real good shot at the CrossFit Games this year, and he's your size, but I think he's about 210 right now. And so the issue that I think you're probably struggling with is, like, what's a comfortable weight that you can CrossFit. Now, I'm going to tell you, you're not built like a CrossFitter. Even though CrossFit is supposed to be like this, broad domains and things of that nature, frankly, it's really kind of a sport for like 5'9", 5'10" guys that are like 190 to 195 pounds. And so you have to kind of know that going in. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have success. Nate Schrader is someone that comes to mind. I used to think Ben Smith was actually a much bigger guy than he, I saw him in real life, and he's actually like my size. So that sort of surprised me. But I would say that, getting to maybe 8% probably makes a little bit of sense. But the way that you would do that would be a little different. I'd be interested to know, like, how you do with like long endurance type of stuff. Because I know I'm way too tall, but I feel like I can compete well in my area. Yeah, you probably can. I would say that usually somebody in your situation, they're going to struggle with cardio type of activities, the long endurance type of events. Any WOD that's going to go 15 minutes is going to tend to wear on a person that is your size. And so kind of working on that energy system is something that I would recommend. Some level of work in like the 5K to 10K range, some level of work in terms of 1 mile sprints, things of that nature, where you're kind of building up that capacity. And what's interesting about kind of what that does is it sort of like loosens up your muscle tissues and allows your muscle tissues to breathe a little bit. You said, all right, it's not my best though. I like short and heavy. Yeah, typically, like bigger guys are going to like short and heavy. And so I'm not saying that you wouldn't focus on that as well. But what ends up happening is that if you kind of leave that aerobic base, it's sort of hard to get it at some future point. And so what I think you would probably see is you could potentially stay at 225 and get to 7.5. You might find that some of the running, though, would allow you to be at 215 at about 7.5 to 8%. My suggestion is that you could probably get to about 7%. 7% for you, is really, that's going to put you at 217, something like that. I think the best way to get there, though, is going to be by building your aerobic base and that cardio, and just sort of adding that into the rotation. You can probably talk to your coaches about that. In terms of like fasting, mean, can you tell me your age? Did he mention his age, April?
I don't think he did. I'm curious to know what time he trains.
Yeah, what time do you train, Ben? He's 26. Yeah, don't fast.
Yeah, he's got so much testosterone and everything else.
Yeah. I would say that he trains around 10. I would probably have breakfast around 8, just so you can, maybe just a light breakfast. Make sure to have carbs the night before. And, I do like running in the morning. And that might be something you could do, if you started to wake up, as an example, around 6 to 7 o'clock, and got in a little half-hour run, something like that, maybe 2-3 days a week. Once again, I would talk to somebody about programming this type of stuff for you, though. That way you're not just kind of like doing it randomly. And I'll tell you that I do this. I'm going to be doing some training for the Granite Games, and so I'll reach out to some people that I know just to get their thoughts. I mean, I have a general idea of what I should be doing, but it's interesting when you start talking about this. I mean, the one thing that you should do as a 26-year-old is just don't get in your own way. That's the problem that I see with a lot of 26-year-olds that are talking about fasting and things of that nature. Those types of things, they're useful tools later on. For you, I mean, it's basically just like beast mode time. And, the more that you can add some of that aerobic base, the better off you'll be. He said, yeah, I'll see you in St. Cloud then. Yep, we're going to be training. Actually, you should probably get to know Taylor Jackson. Taylor is a guy that started with us. He was 5'9", 160. Now he's 5'9", and he's got 162 pounds of lean mass. He would be a great example of somebody. I know he has a trainer that he works with, that he gets a lot of volume from. And Taylor eats about 5,000 calories a day, typically. That's just one of the advantages of being 26 and doing a lot of cool stuff. So let me get to a couple other questions here. So Joe was asking, hi guys, on training days I'm supposed to eat 300 grams of carbs. Can you talk about spacing carb consumption out throughout the day versus holding them off to eat most of the carbs towards the end of the day? I train early mornings. So I wouldn't say that the goal is to necessarily hold off, eating them, the night before necessarily. But if you're working out in the morning, you're certainly going to want to have some carbohydrates the night before. So let's say between dessert and dinner, that look like 100 grams, okay? Then depending on the time, let's see. He says he works out in the morning. It's early morning, so he's probably going to do that fasted. So you'd have coffee. Post-workout, you would want to have either a shake, depending on convenience, or real food. Big fan of real food in this scenario. Some type of meat rather than bacon. Pork chops would be a good one, like a hash that isn't like loaded with oils, because what you want is more like baked potatoes, not necessarily a baked potato, but baked fries, baked hash browns, things of that nature, so you can kind of keep some of the oils out of the mix, so the nutrients load more effectively. I don't know if Joe's still here, so hopefully Joe speaks up if he is here. In terms of spacing them throughout the day, I don't believe that you necessarily have to have. So for instance, if you had 100 grams of carbs the night before, you had, say, 75 to 100 grams post-workout, and then you had the rest of the 100 throughout the day, you know, whether it be in your lunch, and then maybe a snack. I'm cool with that. I think that that's probably about what mine looks like, in fact, most of the time. Um, when you're talking about 300 grams of carbs or 450 or, you know, some of the, you know, bigger numbers, really you do have to space it out. Otherwise, you know, your meals just get too big, you know, and you're trying to accomplish a lot of things. The one thing that I would say though is, you know, definitely try to get in your fibrous vegetables around that lunch meal, especially if you're working out the next day. Let's see, post-workout, I usually have Progenics and a cup of white rice. I mean, that's okay. You know, that's like, you know, that's basically 24 grams of protein and about 30 grams of carbohydrate. So that's not going to get you kind of where you need to go. But the meal, you know, if you had that, you know, as a drink, and then had a meal for breakfast, then that would make some sense. I don't know that I would necessarily, you know, I'm starting to become like, I mean, I don't want to say like negative to Progenics, but, you know, after moving to True Nutrition, where basically the same scoop has 24 grams of protein, and so you have one scoop rather than two scoops, you know, to me, knowing that the quality is a little bit better through True Nutrition, and the fact that I don't have to eat this, you know, kind of double the size of protein, that tells me that, you know, that's probably a good thing. He's saying we just ordered True Nutrition actually, so that's great to hear. If you want your True Nutrition to taste similar to Progenics, what you want to order is the debitterized hydrolyzed whey. And you can get like the single servings. They'll do it. The flavoring is either singles or doubles. The singles are fine, and you might have to mask the flavor a little bit, but it's okay. I would suggest though, if you want to get a flavor similar to Progenics, you might need to double the flavoring. And so the one thing I will say is when you get debitterized whey from True Nutrition, you're getting, you know, the best of the best. You know, I mean, the only thing better that you could get would be something like Pepto Pro or something like, you know, just a regular hydrolyzed whey. But I'm telling you, don't do it, brother, because that stuff tastes horrible. You know, I had joked about it, that it tastes like hate in your mouth. Good call on the debitterized whey. I was not that smart, and unfortunately, I bought 2 pounds of it, and it's sort of sitting on top of my fridge at this point. But getting back to carbs, what is an ideal post-carb source and quantity? I mean, we like Vitargo, loads real well. 70. Weird. I lost you guys for just a second there. Ben saying Pepto Pro is the best for recovery, worth taste. Yeah, you know, I don't know. I don't know that it is. I actually struggled with Pepto Pro stomach wise, and so that was another factor. But you cannot hide the taste of Pepto Pro. So that's, you know, if you start putting Pepto Pro in your stuff, just know that it's going to taste bad, and you're going to have to try and figure out a way around it. I mean, the easiest way around this stuff is just to shoot it. You know, just basically take like 8 ounces of water, you know, 6 ounces of water, mix it up in that thing, and just, you know, throw it back as quickly as possible, you know, and then you don't really have, you know, you'll deal with a little aftertaste, but, you know, that's kind of the price you have to pay. What we're talking about, if you don't know, if you don't buy this type of stuff, is basically these, you know, proteins, you know, the idea is that Progenics was supposedly like this. You know, I'd question whether the quality is similar. But basically, these high quality proteins load better into your muscle and allow for better recovery. And so, as an example, I sent some of that stuff to Danny Horan, and like I said, I use it. One of the reasons why I use it, I have a dairy protein allergy, and so when you have a dairy protein allergy similar to baby formula, it breaks down so quickly that you get no allergic symptoms, and that's why baby formula has hydrolyzed whey in it. But that's also why it smells kind of funky. So yeah, I mean, I would say, I would say 1 cup of white rice probably isn't enough. I would say that, exploring that a little bit more, maybe having something like Vitargo, something like waxy maize. I always liked, back in the, days where I was just exploring with this stuff, I would have like half of a thing of Gatorade and then put 2 scoops of waxy maize in that. And that worked. I mean, that was a relatively inexpensive option. It doesn't load as well. You'll feel a little bloated for a while. We talked a little bit about this in the forum or in Science Lab Off Topic this weekend, that sometimes bloated is a little bit of the goal. And so, so I wouldn't be overly worried about that, especially if you're working out in the morning. Just make sure you try and get in 70 grams, whether it be drinkable, whether it be through potatoes. Just remember that, 1 cup of rice is only 30 grams, 40 grams. Half of our medium sweet potato is only 30 grams, 40 grams. So you really need to eat more than one, is kind of the long story short. Kaylee Belly is saying being bloated is good. Yes, being bloated is very good. Being bloated is basically your body's reaction to kind of cellular overload. And so bloating is going to be one of the things that's going to allow you to make your cells more flexible over time. I can tell you, I'd say 2 to 3 days a week, I'm going for bloated. The whole idea being is that if I'm bloated, I'm really trying to push more nutrients into my cells so it can be more used in my workouts. And so I would not use, or view being bloated necessarily as a bad thing. In fact, I would view it as something that your body will adjust to over time. Any thoughts on that, April? I'm sort of hogging the whole webinar here.
You're ignoring me as usual. I think bloating is different.
You get to talk to them all the time. I don't get to talk to everybody all the time.
I think bloating is part of the normal process. I tell people all the time in my journey, the past 1.5 to 2 years, I've had, fat days, skinny days, jack days, lean days, Jabba the Hutt days. It's never, you're never, completely lean and, no level of bloat every day. Like what you said, it's actually healthy. It's actually normal. Our bodies are processing inflammation. You have a heavy leg day, the scale's going to be up the next day. It's completely normal.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you'll go to bed, feeling a little bloated, something like that. You have some carbs at night, and then you wake up and you're like, holy shit, look at these abs.
I think that's called, I was telling someone the other day, that's called a food baby. You have the food baby, and then you wake up and it's delivered itself with those nice fine abs.
Something like that. Kim saying April's Jabba the Hutt is Kim's dream body. Yeah, so that's, yeah, I mean, we all have that, right? I remember a guy saying to me, he's like 7% body fat, and he's like, man, every time I sit down, I feel like Jabba the Hutt. And I was like, I'm going to strangle you. So let's see. Let's see. A lot of sex things I need to get through. So John's saying I'm 5'7" and 185 pounds. John's yelling at me for some reason. He's in all caps. I'm 5'7", 185 pounds, wanting to be 205 pounds, but be leaner. Should I be eating carbs or cutting carbs? Well, you definitely wouldn't be cutting carbs, but I don't think you're going to be able to get too lean at 5'7". I think that, well, you know, what John's bringing up is sort of an interesting point. And I talked about it in one of the videos recently where the question was, you know, I want to gain lean mass and I want to lose fat. And I said in the video, you have to pick one. And if John were to go to 205 as an example, he might be picking to gain some fat in that process. I will say this, John, I don't know how lean you are. There are some people that are really lean in that state. You're basically about the same height and weight as Matt Frazier. Matt's probably 10, 11%. I know some people are going to debate that. You know, I body test CrossFit Games athletes all the time, so I feel like I have a pretty good base for saying what I'm saying. If you want to look at somebody like Nick Urankar, you know, he's 10%, and Nick looks like the Hulk. And so keep that in mind. I would say that if John were to go to 205, he's almost certainly going to add fat in that process. And maybe that's okay. As an example, when I moved to powerlifting, this was actually sort of interesting because this was sort of when Eat to Perform first started. I had already decided that I was going to move up to 181, and you know, ended up deadlifting more as a result. I can deadlift pretty close to what I was doing then now at 165, but really that process of getting to 181 was the thing that got me there, and then I was able to kind of come back down and kind of keep that strength. A lot of that is just training your central nervous system to be able to take that beating, and your weight and fat going up, you know, is part of that process. And I remember, you know, people saying to me like, wow, the Eat to Perform guy's getting fat, you know, like being 175, 180 pounds is fat. But I had, you know, I was basically practicing what I preach, even though, you know, people, you know, they want to believe that you can be like super lean and like, you know, lift a lot of weight. And, you know, you see it with powerlifters all the time that, you know, what they'll do is just get relatively heavy, like similar to what John's saying. They just won't care about how lean they are going to 205. And so what they'll do is they'll just go to 205. In fact, Mark Ripito talks about it. And this is, if you want to know what the advice, Ben, what Mark Ripito would give you, Mark Ripito would say, go to 205. Who was it that was, I think Ben might already be, I think Ben's 6'3", 225. But I
think it was, wasn't it John or?
Well, this is John. But I was just like referring back to, let's see, Joe and Ben. Let's see. Well, anyway, long story short, is what Mark Ripito would say to you, John Powell, is he would say, just go to 200, you know, and when you go to 200, you'll end up lifting more. One thing that I would suggest, though, is if you're going to go to 205 and you want to stay relatively lean, this was something I sort of figured out that I didn't know, you know, 2-3 years ago when I first started going down that path, is don't lose your aerobic base. You know, that was really, really the thing that sort of, I had to regain, and that was harder. And I would say I'm still kind of not there, or not really where I would want to be. I'm probably similar to where I was in the past now, but a lot of that's based on how much I weigh. And I feel like I should be a little bit further along if I had kept up my aerobic base. So that's what I would suggest to you. But I think to a certain extent, just go to 205. Like if you want to get to 205, don't worry about, being lean. You can always deal with the fat part of things. Now, a couple things that I would say is make sure that your protein's right. Make sure that carbohydrates, like he's asking, which should I put, more carbohydrates, more or lower carbohydrates. I would argue that increasing carbohydrates is going to be a good thing. And then also when you're trying to put on mass, the one thing that you want to do is lift at high rep ranges. And so you don't want to just start going to 205 and then just start doing 1 rep maxes all the time or do max effort stuff all the time. You want to have, a systematic approach that allows you to really focus on that lean mass and building a muscle. But I can say genetically, 5'7" dudes aren't supposed to be, 8% body fat at 205. That's just not the way nature works. You might be able to get pretty lean that way. Some of it's genetics, but I'm just saying you're kind of working against genetics. But that might be okay. That might be one of the things that allows you to get there. And then you go, well, okay, Paul, I'm, 205, I'm 5'7", I'm really strong now, got a lot of muscle, more than I had, but I'd like to lose some of this fat. Well, guess what? Now that your calories and food are up, it's a lot easier to cut from there. So I hope that makes sense. He might have actually left because that was a while ago. Let's see. Danae, is ETP only really beneficial for CrossFit? No. The basis of Eat to Perform is based on the science of total daily energy expenditure. And so total daily energy expenditure benefits anyone in any situation. You could literally be in a coma, and the science of total daily energy expenditure would be helpful to know, or at least helpful for your doctors to know in that scenario. But yeah, I mean, pretty much whatever you do, you could be sedentary. We don't recommend that. Obviously, that we're a performance site. But what you do might be walking, and that's okay too. Says I'm working through knee injuries and arthritis, so I'm doing more swimming, cycling, and lifting at the moment. All those things are fine. Lost a lot of fitness and gained weight because of injuries, and I'm sure food choices. Yeah, and so I think the process of, figuring out what your calorie burn is, that's why you see a lot of the Fitbit posts and things of that nature. And then also kind of matching it up to, what you eat. Maybe, some of those bad choices that you're talking about, are related to being overly reliant on convenience foods, and just, having some planning in general that would help you. She did have, maybe that was it. Yeah, that was it. Any thoughts? I mean, it's 8:02 right now, so I'm going to try and whip through that. We spent a lot of time on the second. What now?
I said, I think you covered it.
Okay. So, Vanessa, I just don't feel like eating in the mornings, and I know I should be. Any suggestions? Yes, I don't eat in the mornings. So there you go. You don't have to eat in the mornings if you don't feel like it. I do eat earlier than I used to. I used to actually wait till 11, 12. That's just what felt right. The one thing that I would say is that a lot of people will run into, like what you're referring to, Vanessa, is the fact that Most of the studies that talk about people that don't eat, they're sort of anecdotal. And what normally happens is that the people get starving, and then their first choice is a donut or, some other, really energy dense source. So what I would suggest to you is to have some plan that is filling, that is nutrient dense, but potentially, has a little energy density too, because carbohydrates will provide some level of satiety, and so that'll help your hunger signaling. Usually my first meal of the day, I have right around the time we have a staff meeting each day, which is about 10 o'clock. And so I'll have oatmeal with a Quest bar in it. And that's usually gets me to about 1 o'clock, and then I'll have a meal. I'm trying to think of what I had today. Today I had pork chops for breakfast, pork chops and eggs. Well, breakfast, lunch, I don't really, make a big deal on what that is. Vanessa saying perfect. Thank you. Great information. Let's see. Raina's saying, do we include fruits and vegetables in our carb totals? This is sort of a controversial topic. We suggest that you do, but not necessarily for the reason you might think. First of all, in terms of fibrous vegetables, they don't add up to a whole lot of calories. And so you're not really focused on the calories in the case of fibrous vegetables. You're focusing on the fiber. And what you're really trying to determine is whether or not you're eating too much fiber and it's not allowing for enough food. And so that's the reason why you would do that. Fruit is energy dense. You can overeat fruit. Most people don't. That's one of the reasons why Weight Watchers has it as a low calorie point or a 0 calorie point, depending on the fruit. So I would encourage people to eat fruit from the standpoint of micronutrients. Once again, you sort of run into the problem that fiber will ultimately, if you're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, like to the point where it's stopping you from eating enough food throughout the day, then we would say kind of pull back on that a little bit, maybe allow for a little bit more protein, a little bit more starches, because that's ultimately the goal of what we're trying to teach you guys, if that makes sense. Raina's also saying, so excited you pronounced my name correctly. The only reason I pronounced your name correctly is because my niece is named Raina. Let's see. Steve is asking, what is the difference between using milk versus water when mixing protein? I would say calories, right? And kind of whether or not you can tolerate milk. One of the values of milk is that, it does have casein in it. And so if you're mixing whey protein with milk, especially whole milk, you're going to get kind of that curdling that allows for a little bit slower absorption, which is why you often see casein and whey protein mixed together. That way you sort of get the best of both worlds. And usually when you have a casein and whey protein shake, it kind of tastes like a shake because of the thickness and the richness. Any thoughts on what I'm saying there, April, or are we just flying through these?
We're just flying through. No, I agree. Calories, taste, milk can obviously thicken up your, almond milk or regular milk actually is going to thicken up your shake and give it a slightly different texture. But other than that.
Yeah, let's see. Sarah Forster is saying, what are your thoughts on drinking alcohol? Will my results suffer for drinking an even glass of wine? No. I'm just going to say that definitively. The issue will not be the glass of wine. The issue will be the stuff that you're eating around that glass of wine. It'll be the cheese that you have with the wine. It'll be the dinner that you're having with that wine. I think wine is one of the most beneficial things when you're talking about it like this. Then some people go, well, this is my glass of wine, and then it's a tumbler. So, it's really not the glass of wine. Anyone that would tell you that is misinformed. Certainly, if we're talking about alcohol, we have to talk about the fact that it's just the way that your body views it. It's going to want to get it in and out kind of quickly. That's the reason why you get tipsy, or just get a little bit off if you're just having a glass of wine and it kind of relaxes you. Part of the reason why it does relax you is because your body's trying to get it in and out as quickly as possible. But no, I mean, a lot of people will find that they lean out. My wife only has wine once or twice a week, and pretty much if she has wine, she's going to be leaner the next day. And so, a lot of people will see some benefit from it. But long story short, it always comes down to what you eat overall. And it's not just that one glass of wine that's got 140 calories in it. And so, there you go. I don't think you would view anything in isolation. And certainly, if you asked me whether or not, if you had wine, you would get an 8-pack as opposed to having a 6-pack. If you drank wine, or if you didn't have wine, you get an 8-pack. If you drank wine, you get a 6-pack. I would argue you should probably go for the 6-pack and just chill out with the wine a little bit. Any thoughts on that, April?
Yeah, if it's going to keep your sanity. I think you hit the key point about what you eat around, but I think the big thing is moderation. Some people can, they have moderation and they can have a glass of wine and that's it. I've seen many food logs that have like 20 ounces a day, and I think the key there is that it adds empty calories. A glass absolutely isn't going to hurt you, but when you're over consuming and you're counting those calories, in the place of carbohydrates or other food, it never fails. 2-3 days later, you want to, eat everything in the pantry because you're starving and you just can't understand why. I've hit all my calories. I don't understand why I'm hungry, because you had that bottle of wine 3 days ago.
Right. And that basically just doesn't add up to a lot of food. That's the issue, I mean, all that said, I would say that at least 50% of the people that struggle getting lean, maybe not that high, but it's high, man. I mean, it's really alcohol that causes a lot of the issues because of what April's saying is like, one, overconsumption is basically not calories that hold a lot of value to your body. And then, back-to-back days can add up, and then all of a sudden you're hungry, you're wondering why you're overeating, why you're struggling losing fat. It's basically a combined effect. Let's see. Kaylee, sorry if this is off topic. Is it true if you build muscle, get lean, that cellulite goes away? I think that, we wrote an article about cellulite. Certainly, the leaner you are, it's going to push some of the cellulite away. I think to a certain extent, cellulite might be just your destiny. One of the discussions that I have to have with people a lot, I'm sure April has to have with people a lot, is, did your grandmother have a big chest and hips? Did your mom have a big chest and hips? Guess what? You were supposed to have big chest and hips. And cellulite, I'm just speaking as a man. We barely think of it. I mean, it's just not something that men think about all that much as we look at women. I don't think that affects, the way that women view it. Similar to the way that if I look in the mirror, I don't like seeing, fat below my navel on occasion. But that's that's just us being overly critical of ourselves unnecessarily. I mean, to a certain extent, you know, you are who you are. And if you can get in front of a mirror naked and be happy with that person, ultimately that will be favorable. That said, you know, can you build lean mass? Will that lower cellulite? Sure, it will. I wouldn't say that that's the end game, though. I think the end game really starts with you just being happy with, okay, if I can take a gradual approach, maybe some of this will go away. But frankly, it's just not that big a deal, you know? And I know that's easy for me to say as a man. So, April, what are your thoughts on cellulite? How big of a deal is it?
I do think it's hereditary, but I think, you know, most of it is like what you said, you know, it's our own self, you know, image, it's our own, you know, we're being critical of ourselves. You know, to some extent, the more muscle mass you have, it will be less noticeable, you know, but ultimately depending upon your genetics and, you know, how you're built and your shape, you know, you would really have to get to extreme unhealthy low levels of body fat to get it all away, you know. You know, it's just part of life. You just have to love it.
Yeah, well, I don't know that you have to love it necessarily, but I think you should always kind of have a healthy relationship with your mirror.
Not love it. You have to love your body with the cellulite, with the flaws and all, you know, especially if, you know, if you've had children and, you know, and things like that. It's, you know, kind of like a mother that has stretch marks, you know, it's.
I mean, obviously I've talked about my sex life. You know, I'll go a little further. You know, in the case of my wife's stretch marks from, you know, the children and things of that nature, I did that. That's part of our relationship. That's a bond that we have together. You know, my wife. You know, like I said, you know, we've been together 19. She doesn't look vastly different from what she looked like at 19. She's still kind of that same person. I signed up for this exact plan. And my wife's not like, you know, 18% body fat. You know, she's a Scandinavian woman. She's got hips, you know, she's got a chest. And so you're naturally going to carry more fat. And, you know, cellulite, I mean, I can't honestly tell you if my wife has cellulite or not. I'm sure she probably focuses on it. I genuinely don't know. And some people say, like, you know, you're brainwashed. You know, you've like convinced yourself. I'm okay with that. You know, like I love my wife intensely, and you know, it's not an act. You know, we work on that bond, and you know, and it's not a given. I mean, like when you're in a relationship, like if you're you know, in a relationship and you're about to get married, I'm just going to tell you, like, you know, I've been with my wife for, you know, 27, 28 years. You can't take anything for granted. You know, the ebbs and flows of a relationship, you know, tend to, you know, you gotta make sure that you're keeping up and kind of, you know, feeling things out. You know, if Eat to Perform were ever a distraction as it relates to my role as a husband or my role as a father, Eat to Perform would be gone, because those things are more important to me. And I can show you examples in my life where I prioritized my family over the things that I did, and I just did something else. I don't think that's going to be the case with Eat to Perform, but I'm just trying to emphasize how important the relationships that you have with your loved ones and spouses are. And I know April feels pretty similar.
Absolutely. Just like you're talking about cellulite, and, you know, when you get married, you love them for who they are, you know, then, and then, you know, as they continue to mature and grow, just like my husband, you know, he had a full head of hair when we got married. You know, now he's lost half of it, but I still love him, you know. It's, you know, I think the ebbs and flows actually makes the love stronger, you know. Nothing's ever picture perfect.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, you know, once again, like, the soft parts of your body are as attractive as the firm parts of your body. You know, there's, you know, I think it comes down to the individual, you know, and but I think what April is saying is actually really important, is that, you know, when you love the person, the exterior, you know, becomes less important. Um, and that should be the case for your relationship with yourself as well. So let's see. Let's see. Teddy's saying, Paul, are you still planning on experimenting with eating to what your Fitbit says daily? Yes, I am. I've been doing the wave method for the last 6 weeks with the wave method group. There's a group of about 13 people, and we're about to come to an end. So it'll probably take me to about July, maybe mid-July, to get to my full calories, because I will be training for the Granite Gains, so my calories will probably be 3,000 plus, hopefully close to 3,500. And right now I'm right at 165. So yeah, it should be fun. I'm sort of excited because my strength actually hasn't, you know, I'm actually PRing a lot of lifts. And so, you know, to be able to PR lifts in a deficit, I can't even imagine what things are going to be like when I start upping my calorie intake. Trey saying, speaking of leaning out, that's my goal. 5'6", 198, done P90X and Insanity in 2013, 2014, got down to 177, still had the belly fat. Yeah, that happens a lot, you know, when you take an overly cardio approach. Usually you're not losing as much fat as you think. And sometimes you'll, you know, still have the fat around your midsection, even though your overall body fat percentage went down. Now I'm doing CrossFit since September 2014 and just started Eat Perform. I gained about 10 pounds since starting CrossFit. One thing about CrossFit, I mean, certainly gaining muscle related to CrossFit is going to be a plus, especially if you weren't using that muscle and you started to kind of, you know, P90X is sort of like entry level, you know, to what a lot of people do with CrossFit. What I would say is, you know, if you're, you know, going to try and keep that aerobic base with CrossFit, you're going to want to gradually go down. You know, at 5'6", you're probably going to want to ultimately be, you know, 177, maybe even in the 160s. You know, you don't want to do that immediately. But one of the things that I'm going to suggest, and, you know, I'm not going to get too deep into it, but is some level of CrossFitting a couple days a week, some level of bodybuilding and strength training, and then some level of endurance. Doesn't have to be crazy, but definitely being more aware of your low intensity steady state work would be something that I would encourage you to do. And that's why you see a lot of people wearing the Fitbits and talking about Fitbits a lot. Lynn is saying, just signed up this week, not sure where to start. The website has so much information, but I've found a definitive place to start. But I haven't found a definitive place to start. The definitive place to start by far is just to get in the forums and sign up and just ask for your total daily energy expenditure, and a coach will set you up with a plan, and that's where you start. And so if you struggle with that, you can reach out to Chris Dietz and he can get you set up and ready to go. But yeah, I mean, the simple answer is you don't have to read the books. You don't have to do any of that type of stuff. Really, just get in the forums, start talking to coaches and moderators, and they'll get you rolling. Christian's saying, let's see. Okay, let me see. There was a few. Let's see, just did water body fat test. I'm at 23. Let's see, treating. Okay, so 23% body fat. So yeah, if you, you know, to get to Trey, as an example, for you to get to 20%, that would be the goal that I would suggest for you. Basically, you need to lose about 6 pounds. And so I would take what we do with people once they have their total daily energy expenditure, once they have a good understanding. There might have been some overeating, in your situation. And so having a good understanding of your total daily energy expenditure might allow you to cut those 6 pounds pretty easily. If you still struggle after a while, even eating at total daily energy expenditure, then we can start bringing you into wave cycles in a couple weeks. But to be honest with you, a lot of people, find that, hey, I was kind of overdoing it a little bit on energy dense sources, and so some level of tracking usually will lean a person like you out. Let's see. Christians. So I've got to get 100 grams of fat in a day. I try to get in 70, 80 grams before my workout at 5:30 p.m. Is that acceptable, or can I relax a little bit and save more fats for supper? To be honest with you, I know a lot of people are super worried about that kind of thing. You're talking about 20 grams of fat. Maybe you might want to only save like 10 grams of fat, to where it's like, 90 to 100 grams or 90 to 100 calories. So you're not really kind of obstructing some of what you're trying to accomplish with the starches. But having a little fat with dinner, I don't think it's that big of a deal, and I don't think it's going to hurt your results. And I think it'll allow for a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more of a sane approach. If you try to do things too right, oftentimes that won't be socially the kind of thing that works out well for you, and also sustainability. So having some level of flexibility there, I think, makes some sense. See, Danae is saying another question. Went through the TDE today and a bit unclear on how you choose your various macros and know they are right. It sounds like you just went to the calculator. And if you just went to the calculator, what I would do is I would have a coach give you your total daily energy expenditure. What you'll find is not only will you get a better reading, but you'll have a better understanding of what that reading means through talking to a moderator or a coach. Kaylee said, thank you. Tristina is saying, if you're trying to build muscle, arms, shoulders, back, how often and how long should you work on those muscle groups? Currently, I work out each muscle group once a week for about an hour. That is about all I do. I don't know that that's necessarily like the end-all be-all. The thing that you sort of run into with these scenarios is you have to go, well, what's my end game? And so if your end game is really super jacked arms, backs, and muscles, then you would want to do more than 1 day a week. But if your end game is to build muscle, be better as an athlete, and then potentially have some cardio endurance as an example, then you're going to have to kind of merge all those three things together. And naturally, you're not going to be near as good. As an example, a power lifter that lifts 800 pounds, they're going to eat all the food and lift all the weights. They're going to get really, really strong. And some of them are going to struggle tying their shoes. And so that's not going to allow for a functional person, but it is going to allow them to go towards their goals. And so if that's their goals, the way you do that is to get, kind of big for your size and then lift as much as possible. So it really is going to depend on what your true goals are. And if your goals are fat loss, as an example, then, focusing on muscle building, 5-6 days a week, it's probably not going to be the thing that gives you an overall fitness level.
I need to drop out. It's 9:30 my time, and I got to put my son to bed. Good night, everybody.
All right, this is the last one. So
sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So Sheena's saying, I'm a power lifter, gained so much strength, but I want to cut fat and afraid I'll lose my strength. How do I go about doing this? Well, I'm doing it currently. Like I said, I moved up to 181, was as high as 189. And then now, I'm 165. And what a lot of people don't realize is that strength is important. Yeah, dieting will sometimes hurt you, but I would say that each form sort of teaches you how to kind of move your nutrients more around your lifting and using your time outside of your lifting for fat loss, and so it allows you to lean out. But being bigger, lifting heavier weights right now, that has sort of trained your central nervous system to be able to lift those weights. And so what I would suggest to you, and I still play with this today, right? Even right now, last week I had kind of a hypoglycemic episode that I wasn't too happy about. And I haven't had something like that happen to me in a while. But when I looked at it, I was really just trying to load too much of my carbohydrates, into kind of a smaller window and had a negative reaction as a result. Also kind of was maybe a little sick, so that was potentially a little thing there as well. What I would suggest to you is really to kind of play with the loading of your carbohydrates and really your food, around your workouts. And so if you work out in the morning, you probably want to have more food the night before, and then maybe a little bit of food after. But using the time outside your working out really for more leaning out. So then the question becomes, how much are you working out? And that can become an issue. And so it can get a little complicated. That's of course why we have the coaching forum and why we have people to help you guys walk through that process. We talk a little bit about it here, but the problem with here is that it's a finite amount of time. We have a lot of people, as an example. I think we had, something like 80 people up in here at one point. Let's see. So Trey is saying TDE from body fat test was 2,800 calories. Fitbit is usually telling me I burn 3,200 calories a day on workout days. Do about 3-mile run 3 days a week and some swimming. Yeah, I mean, that's, that sounds about right. If you're trying to lose, fat, as an example, it really does depend on what you do. Like as an example, if you're 3,200 calories, your Fitbit isn't going to really track like your weightlifting all that well. So that will sometimes become an issue. Sometimes your recovery can become an issue. I think actually recovery is a much bigger issue than most people think, because it affects sleep. It affects so many other factors. And it affects how your muscle builds upon itself. And so like the types of fibers that you're building and things of that nature sort of change. So this is about 30 minutes longer than we normally like to go. So I appreciate everybody being here. Obviously, you see April has left. I hung out with you guys a little bit longer. And so I'm just going to let everybody go. I appreciate everybody being here, and I hope this was helpful, and I hope the sex talk wasn't too uncomfortable. So I'll see you guys in the off topic. And oh, by the way, look forward to the new meal planning group tomorrow, which we're going to be announcing early tomorrow morning. So talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.